Trials and Tribulations, where we break down the latest FDA revelations. DAPs, that's the talk of the day. Diversity action plans paving the way. Diversity and trials, that's what we preach. Inclusivity for all, it's within our reach. FDA's draft, we're breaking it down. All diversity trials, the best part around. FDA, please, we need the shift. Diversity and trials, let's uplift. DAP, yeah, you know me. Inclusivity for all, it's the key. Diversity and trials, that's what we preach. Inclusivity for all, it's within our reach.
Woo! Yeah. We're celebrating today because we actually have guests joining us. Hannah and Mark from Creo are here. Quick intros for everyone who doesn't know you, maybe?
Sure,
Yeah.
Hannah, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah Kulkarni. As Mitch said, I am from Creo. I'm a customer success manager there, and I'm also our diversity team lead. I'm super excited to be joining this podcast today and excited to hear everyone's thoughts.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Wartenberger. I'm the head of compliance at Creo, and my responsibilities include, interpreting, the new FDA and other regulatory guidelines for us and our customers, and see how this fits in. And obviously, it's no better topic than what we have going on today. So, thanks for having us.
Oh my God! Absolutely. I mean, if we're gonna have two people from Creo join us, I would probably think this topic fits you two best. So, thank you for coming.
And so, for all of you just turning in, welcome to DiversiTrials and Tribulations. This is the podcast that's doing, as far as I know, the only true deep dive into the FDA Diversity Action Plan draft guidance. I haven't seen any others out there. Big shout out to Clinical Leader. Check it out. I believe it's September 5th. They're going to do a 1-hour dedication to this. And so you may want to check them out. Go register with Clinical Leader. But this is the summary page. And so Mark, Hannah, it's really nice to have you on here. Have you had a chance to see the other videos as we've been progressing over the month?
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, yes. No, and obviously, this is the deepest dive that I've seen on any of these guidances before. I'm shocked we're not in a homemade submarine right now, checking out the Titanic. Maybe not that deep, right? But
is that a good thing? Do we want to be doing that?
we go just before that and come back up. No, this is great. This is incredibly comprehensive, and it's for the people that work in this industry, right? So so many of them don't have the time to sit down and read through it. What does this mean for me as a person that maybe runs clinical trials or has a clinical trial site, or as a coordinator or a monitor, right, and or works at a sponsor, right? So having this form available is great, because it just sharing ideas and interpretations of these guidances is really critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm so glad you said that, Mark, because I was thinking about that the other day. I've heard so many people say, oh, I just don't have the time to think about this. I keep my nose down, I get my work done, and that's all I have to do. And that mentality right there is exactly why we as an industry are not progressing, because we're so busy, we load ourselves so much that we don't have time to think about new things. And then we get trapped in a rut. So I know it's hard, trust me, but Mark, you're absolutely right. Make time to force yourself to learn new things. If you talk to Dan Otap, he said the same exact thing. He has a reading hour every week, super busy guy, but he forces himself to do self-improvement, whether it's a course, learning something, whatever it is. Don't get trapped in a rut. It's like you read my mind, Mark. That was on my mind all week, as you get kind of disappointed. Like you said, there's no other deep dive like this in the industry. And still, if you look at the views, there aren't people biting to it. Nobody's really paying attention, which is kind of disappointing. So,
I agree. I totally agree.
I don't know.
But we have to be
Well,
more
we'll go into
vocal
that. That's a tangent. But for now, let's get into it because I want to talk about this. We'll start off just as a completionist. We'll finish this like we started it. We'll get this the SWOT analysis done. But this time we have more people. So I volunteer to abstain from talking about the SWOT. So I'm going to ask everyone else to lead it.
Very nice. Well, I'll kick it off. I'm used to doing these too. So starting with the strengths that we took away from the last two sections, those sections were relatively short. Surprisingly, though, we did end up with a lot of content and a lot of comments from them. So we did see that, with the statutory requirements required in Section 7, or it actually be 8, they're minimal. The FDA anticipates DAPs to be possible as far as those exceptions. So really, really minimal expectations or exceptions are expected with those waivers to be granted, and really, really highlighted like only in rare instances that they are expecting to be able to grant waivers. Then again, FDA may, within applicable law, post the relevant waiver information on the FDA's website. They say may, but it did seem like the language in there was pretty heavy on that. If there are going to be waivers that they do grant, that was going to be public information. They were going to let people know about that. So we thought that was pretty good because it's kind of that accountability. Do you want to be that sponsor that's always trying to seek waiver requests and always pushing for waivers? I think was more so also in the language. It seemed more so even the application or the submission of those waivers, that information would be available as well. The FDA did have a requirement, which was nice to see. They have their 60-day response requirement. That's that timeline that they give themselves in order to evaluate waivers and respond. So that was pretty good. And then obviously then encouraging, as they have throughout the whole rest of the guidance languages, to make these submissions, communicate with the FDA along the way. The sooner the better. But if you are looking for a waiver, you better be outside that 60-day window timeline. And then it just kind of reiterating that strength language throughout of how they're strongly encouraging everyone to reach out, actively engage with the FDA and the community as well.
Awesome. Adi, do you want to take weaknesses?
Sure. I'm trying to enlarge the screen here.
Well, Mark, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, I think. Well, I'll let Hadi go, and I'll hold my thought. As a guest,
there you go.
I'll respect the established members of this committee. So I'll go.
Now I can read it, right?
Oh no, Mark, this is your platform. I mean, it's better off saying it now than later than having to backtrack an idea. So if please feel free to chime in.
Okay, just really quick. If I were advising a sponsor on, if someone were to come to us and say, hey, how do you see this play out, especially when it comes down to requesting diversity action plan waivers? Good things come in threes, and the FDA makes it very clear 3 times that waivers aren't going to happen. At the very beginning of this section, row 624, and FDA anticipates that submission of a diversity action plan, as discussed in this guidance, will be possible in most cases. 1. Row 632, a waiver is necessary based on what's known, what can be determined, and then it goes in further. It says, given the importance of increasing enrollment of historically underrepresented populations in clinical research, including clinical studies of drugs and devices, in order to detect potential differences. Full or partial waivers around the requirements around the submission of a diversity action plan will only be granted in rare instances. 2, and the third one is FDA generally does not intend to waive the requirement to submit the diversity plan action plan, even if the disease condition is relatively homogeneous. So, row 652, row 639, and row 624. They make that 3 times. They basically make that very clear that action plan waiver is very unlikely, right? And I don't think sponsors should plan for. Why waste the time on trying to establish this the stance that you want to take, that we're going to try to get a waiver, right? Just put your best foot forward, create a diversity action plan, and then take it from there, right? You can spend there's only so much time you can spend, right? You want to spend time kind of working around it, or trying to put your best foot forward and try to create a diversity action plan. So,
right. Well, I mean, the thought that I had there with that too, Mark, is that as a sponsor, you would have to do that due diligence, because in that instance where your waiver request is denied, if you are getting up near that submission timeline, you better
already do it anyway.
to develop a plan.
You gotta have one. Yeah. Gotta have a plan B.
I think a waiver is going to be just as rare as the diseases that we're trying to treat. So it's a blue moon. And I mean, realistically, I agree. And I did the same thing, Mark. I did a tally every time I read that. And it's not just in this section. There's an underlying hint that this will be a requirement, and it's going to be a lot harder to avoid this requirement than it is going to be just to do it. We strongly encourage is going to turn into it's going to be the path of least resistance, right? The path of least resistance is going to be to perform adapt, not to avoid it. This is a rare occasion.
Yeah.
So Hadi, I'm going to switch over to weaknesses here if you want to read it. Is that big enough for you?
Yes, please do.
All right, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. So, of course, as in every section, we find weaknesses. We analyze what those weaknesses are, and we try to actually turn those weaknesses into opportunities for the next section. Now, the waiver, again, requirements are not provided in the guidance. So, again, as Dr. Fox said, it would be probably the path of least resistance just to go ahead and just probably apply for the DAP. And we're hoping that, down the road, there will be a clear language on what repercussions or consequences are there when a sponsor does not really follow through or provide clear indication of why they're not being able to probably provide the breakdown of the race, sex, and ethnicity and so on. As of now, they're just asking the sponsor to explain why they were not, in case they were not able to really attain those goals, but there is no clear language as per se as to what consequences that will follow. So I'd like to see stronger language around yes, the waiver is going to only be probably provided in rare situations. That's great. You're required, and Susan told you the understanding is every sponsor should go ahead and actually submit a DAP. But then again, I'd like to see a stronger language in terms of those biases when the sponsors are actually bringing them up, in terms of explaining why they were not able to actually provide or follow through. Anyway, let's move on. So there's an illogic waive DAP for the statutory reasons listed in lines 632 to 638. If DAPs are developed per section 5, specifically in lines 232 and 273, and at planning phases of a trial, then the needs to waive per this section 8 would be non-existent. So moving on, this impractical impracticable. It's like, I even have a problem spelling this. Impracticable. It's like, okay. It's like, what does it really mean? I mean, it's vague and it's very subjective, and it doesn't really, present or define, the term quite clearly. So I'd love to see, like, a stronger, more defined language around this in line 637. So moving forward to 639 to 645, there were some mention. They mentioned something about the full and partial DAP waivers. But these do not specifically, explain or are not clearly defined and cannot be waived to justify either category. So I'd like to see more clarification around this as well. So recruitment websites, and that is actually presented online in line 701, 703, and study-specific advertisements require IRB approval. However, the IRB or IRB processes are not included in the guidance. I'd like to see more of a, how the IRB would probably be part of this, how would probably shape, the progress of this, step or process more clearly for the reader or for the sponsor. So now Section 9 appears to be an extension of recommendation from Section 5. However, there is no indication these activities are included in the DAP or reportable to FDA. One thing I really want to throw in here, so there's no, discussion around retention. Okay, great. We're talking about how, sponsors should probably provide DAPs, and, how they're probably going to get more diverse populations, represented in their clinical studies. But I would have loved to see a little discussion or a small discussion as in regards or in terms of how they plan to retain those subjects in clinical trials. So retention is probably something that they might probably want to go into in further revisions or future revisions. So that's what I have so far. But again, just remember that every weakness can be turned into, or a challenge can be turned into an opportunity. So this is a way for everyone to move forward and be vocal about and proactive about what we need to do at this point.
Good timing, Hadi. Let's go to opportunities. And going back to retention, we touched that in Section 5, but again, that's a site thing. That's not a sponsor thing. You can say that they can work with sites to have retention, but sponsors are not responsible for retaining patients. That's why sites perform the trials. But I think that we kind of touched at that. But you're right. We can actually, when you talk about advertising and things like that, there's the advertising in recruitment. But again, when you go back to transactional with recruitment, they're done talking about it. So yeah, it would be nice to see in long term.
In general, I think, though, to add to that, though, the retention aspect is there are things that sponsors can do to support the study overall with maintaining retention and helping the sites with retention, right? It's like those decentralized aspects, providing transportation support and covering all those additional costs, childcare, whatever they're willing to like reimburse as far as like patient stipends go. All that stuff is that those are initiatives that the sponsors could provide to help then the sites with retaining those participants.
Community outreach programs to be funded by sponsors. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
Hannah, our guest, would you be willing to do opportunities?
Yeah, definitely. All right, so for opportunities, clarify if waiver requests will be reportable to Congress per statutory requirements. Rows 632 to 638, clarify logic and reasoning for the statutory criteria, A, B, and C. 630 that are satisfied. Row 637, provide clear guidance as to when a DAP is impracticable by case-by-case basis. Develop strategically swift public health emergency response, row 638 and 647. That doesn't compromise the critical public safety that follows DAP requirements. Apply more consideration and thought, possibly with additional logic and reasoning for satisfying the statutory criteria, row 630 during DAP waiver review. Clarify what FDA department is responsible for the review of DAP waivers with a focus on appropriate qualifications. Clarify what constitutes a full and partial waiver, 639 and 645, and the differential content between these categories. And then the last one is to support lines 692 and 693, create interactive email communications with the community for fluid and informed DAP development. The one that I said right before that, to clarify what constitutes a full and partial waiver, I think that's a really, really important piece here, because I think in general, overall, these FDA documents are not super clear. I mean, it has improved over the last few guidances. This one is definitely a little bit more clear, but again, it's not super clear on what the expectations are for, the research sites and the organizations conducting these. So I think that is a huge, huge opportunity for this paper in general.
So how many guidances do we have so far from FDA? Like what diversity guidances? Is it like 13, 14?
Cumulatively, I'm not sure what the conditions have been available.
I think I heard this 13. This is number 13. It's like, okay.
Well, yeah.
Right. I feel like it just keeps going and going, and
can we finalize this and move on?
Right,
Yeah.
right. And it's like, why do we keep having this conversation over and over again? It should have just been said and done after that first guidance. And I mean, to me, it's like a no-brainer, honestly. I don't know why it's like still such a huge issue and such a big question that it's just a no-brainer to me.
Well, the guidance, interestingly enough, like we would like to think it's probably, you get one topic as a whole, and here's how we address it. Maybe you have revisions as you improve, right? Of course.
Right.
But all the different variances of guidance that the FDA has released, they're so specific. Like it's addressing, ethnicity and sex-related data collection properties, for device studies. Like it's that detailed, right? It's not all inclusive. So then they're like just referencing all these other pieces.
And it's just draft after draft after draft after draft. Like, when are we going to make it final?
Yeah. And then when you have all these different guidances, you risk like conflict. Like what if they conflict with each other?
Right.
You risk not being accurate. Like, for example, when they read, and I get it, that's kind of hard to do when you talk about Federal Register number 15, was just updated to significantly with additional populations. And you don't reference the current Federal Register number 15 on a draft guidance. You're just creating an old document before the ink is dry.
Right.
That's a biggie. That's a biggie.
I found it.
It's just not accurate.
21 years old, right? Like we joked about how he could take this guidance out for a drink. For the industry for the study of sex differences in the clinical evaluation of drugs from July '93. That's, you got to do better than that, right? 21 years old documents for new guidance.
All right, Mark, do you want to wrap this up with threats after your comment?
This one, just for, because we have a forum to different opinions. If you look at the very bottom of the draft guidance, right, they actually include Appendix 1, which is elements of a diversity action plan, kind of a summary, right? Like it's a title page, enrollment goals, rationale. On the one more page down is measures to meet enrollment goals. So if you, let's just take a second. Let's think about what's a partial waiver, right? How would you even get there? Like, would you just then not complete one of these sections? That would be part. Like,
I know, what does that mean?
Okay, would you write up? Do you not include a title page, right? Do you not include enrollment goals? Are you bad at your rationale? So you say, hey, we don't know how this might interact, and that's really the only thinking through this, right? It's really the only way you could say, okay, maybe I don't include a rationale because I have no idea how this drug will interact with a whole host of biological factors that we talk about here in this guidance. So like that's really the only way to kind of maybe get a partial waiver, right? If you don't have the FDA kind of talks about that early on in this guidance, if certain data is not available, maybe then. But other than that, what do you exclude, right? I mean, for a partial waiver, I would love to have a whole section dedicated to what's a partial waiver mean, and this provides additional guidance for everyone in the industry.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that, Mark. As we talked about how it's kind of illogical. If you follow the instructions on how you're supposed to put together a plan, it wouldn't make sense that a waiver even makes sense here. And when you talk about the rationale, they're looking for primarily it's based off of disease prevalence in the population. But they're even specific for in the instances with rare disease, if that disease prevalence data doesn't exist, or you don't have this safety data already done, then you use data from the U.S. Census. You just use standard across the board numbers as opposed to more specific to the disease prevalence. So there really isn't any justification as to why
that's a standard practice, correct? So yeah, it's it gets confusing.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about threats. As a whole, the loophole, right? That if the second you write something down, right, you put it on paper, people will try to find a way around it, right? I mean, that's obviously understood. That goes for any regulation, whether or not it's in clinical trials or elsewhere. Underserved populations, I think having that threat listed here is really vital. Doing what constitutes a public health emergency, right? Obviously, that's we all lived through it over the last couple of years, so we could have a pretty good understanding of that. But we also have learned that Hannah and I work at a tech company, right? We have these tools in place that we provide our customers that allowed clinical trials to go on, right? And the world in the clinical trials world, to a degree, things kind of came to a halt, but things also kind of continued in certain areas. So I think I can see the loophole there, saying, well, we're in a public health emergency, we don't really need to do this, we just need to kind of run this trial. The FDA encourages decentralized tools to be used, so clinical trials can continue as expected or close to it. So that's definitely something that the whole public health emergency loophole, if you want to call it, is something that we should keep a close eye on as well. And additional definition and guidance would help you as well.
Yep. And I think this goes back to what that anonymous comment said. They were really upset about this, and I can share their frustration, although I don't know if I would go as far as that goes. But you're absolutely right, Mark. Why are we excluding protection of certain populations in the effort to protect the public? We're going to exclude people and carve them out because of certain processes. I think this is going to be a necessary part of data safety monitoring boards and power analyses and statistical development. Again, phase 0, and I think you'll see that theme. So we're gonna stop sharing here, but importantly, this is the open forum. We have a few things pulled up if we want to start talking through them, but I thought maybe one thing we could consider as an icebreaker is just very, very quickly for each of us to say 3 things. One is, what stayed the same in your opinion as you read this? 2 is, what changed? And 3 is, what would you like to see different? And so I'll ask our guests to go first.
Okay. What was the first one? What stayed the same? What changed? And what do we want to see?
From the first time you read through the guidance.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of what stayed the same, personally, I still think it's just confusing and hard to understand the whole thing unless you read it 10 plus times. I mean, Mark is a wizard at understanding the FDA documents. This is his bread and butter. But
Mark's like, no, don't say that.
No one is right.
I just can't sleep at night, and then just reading guidance helps if you haven't tried it.
It's really confusing. And I also commend you guys for all the SWOT analyses that you guys have made for each of these sections. I think breaking it down into that analysis has made it much more easy for people to understand, including myself. So I've loved that, but in general, I think it's written in a way too confusing manner. I mean, if it trickles down to the sites and they're reading through this, it's not providing them clarity, which kind of goes to the next part of what you would want to see changing is having it written in a more clear and concise and even flowing way, right? They kind of jump around from topic to topic in some areas. It's not, it's just hard to follow, to be honest. And then what I'd like to see was the clarity part, sorry. And then what was the third one? No, I lost my train of thought.
What would you like to see change?
The clarity, yeah. Again, the clarity, like they just need to write it in a different way or a different manner where it's more easily digestible to the general person. I mean, I don't know who is writing this, and that's kind of something that I've also always wondered. And if you guys know, let me know, but who is writing this? Do you have to qualify to be able to write this document? Are there people that are representing other populations when you're writing this document? And are they really genuinely taking them into consideration when they're writing it? I mean, it makes me wonder, you know, how it was written and who's writing it. So it's just confusing on my
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm very anti like copy and paste for sure. It's happens way too much in this industry, but you know, we noticed some of those where it's like this seems to be clearly a different author between like the device section and the drug section. They're kind of trying to get at the same point, but they worded this paragraph completely different than the other, and one just sounds like just such higher quality of what the message they're trying to portray.
Right.
So consistency.
I could see like over at the FDA, some director tells like an author, "Hey, you got to do this," and so the author's like, oh, "Fine, if I have to," and they just kind of put bare minimum, and it's like whatever. And then you got the other one who's super duper like passionate about it and wants to make sure it's a thing.
Right, who's actually into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So. Right. And I wonder like if, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but like, are there people who are representing these populations that are participating in writing the document? If there aren't, then I imagine the document would be written much differently if there were. Right.
I mean, like an IRB, I mean, they will have to have different, representations from, from the scientific community, from the community itself. So I would think they would have to have actually more of an involvement, especially from the community and those, that will, representing those minorities. And again, like, open it up to external groups like DiversiTrials. I mean, we will be very happy to be part of this.
Maybe they formed like a task force because there's all these different departments down there. Maybe they just pulled a couple representatives from each department and had it in a task force, and that's how they did it. And just do that. So that would be interesting. I mean, that's kind of going into the inner workings of FDA and how they assign things. I doubt we're gonna really see that any, but it's not gonna happen like that. But Mark, so those 3 questions. What stayed the same? What changed in your opinion? What do you want to see change?
Yeah, the same is, I think, the intent. The intent by the FDA, right, to do what? Make sure that we have an adequate representation of the patient population that reflects the population of the United States or the intended target population. Right. I think the intent, reading it over and over, like it's clear. I think they have the right idea behind this. What has changed reading it, I think, is that clinical trials don't happen in a vacuum, right? Clinical trials take place on a global scale, not just the US. And having a document from the FDA that's obviously focused on, FDA on the, United States, where the FDA has kind of the enforcement. It's great, but I think there is, and then we can dive into this a little bit later, right, where we review some of the comments, right? But I think there needs to be consideration of more consideration on how we're dealing with clinical trials on a global scale. Because clinical trials don't just happen in one country or one region on the planet. What I would like to see changed is clarity, but not more detail. Those are two different things.
Nice. I love
And
it. I love it.
The second, you know, and we talked about this, right? The second you write something down, people try to find loopholes around it, and the easy thing will be, you can always, the easy feedback would be like, just provide more detail. No, stop, because then you pigeonhole yourself into something, right? They need to write. If you were sitting at the FDA, they have to write something that applies to many, right? And the approach that, my interpretation is that the approach that taken is one size does not fit all, one size fits many, right? And they have to write this in such a way that meets, you know, most scenarios, right? And like, yes, the five of us can sit here and, you know, figure out how to get around writing diversity plans, or, you know, point out X, you know, point out Z, right? Like that. Yeah, of course we can do that, right? So yeah, they are actually, that's a pretty tough task to come up with a guidance that, you know, meets, you know, drugs, biologics, you know, medical devices, you know, all these different things, you know, and it's, you know, different sponsor sizes, different, you know, trial types, right? Decentralized, site-based, you know, a little bit of both. Yeah, how do you do that, right? I think it's just, you kind of have to appreciate, and maybe this is me just wearing my compliance hat, right? Kind of like taking, you know, their side a little bit. It's just incredibly tough, right? And hats off to them writing it. And of course, we can sit here, it's like, well, you should write this better. I totally get that too, right? But I think we should encourage them to provide clarity, but not necessarily more detail.
Amazing. And Mark, to your point, we've been, saying it over and over again that this is a wonderful, amazing, great step, and we're very, 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 this goes with lots of gratitude. We're very grateful to, whatever they've done, and we're just trying to make it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Mark, did you get all your questions? What stayed the same? What? Okay. So
yes. Intent.
Hadi?
What would be outside of yes, and clarity. Yeah.
Okay. Hadi, what do you think?
My turn. Okay. So, I mean, again, I echo both Hannah and Mark. I mean, the confusion part was like, oh yeah, I mean, all those guidelines are, very confusing to me, and it takes me forever to, I read them over and over again to really get the gist, right? So, or at least, read through the lines. And, again, I don't have this legal background, and sometimes the must and should, and I mean, this gets me at times. I just have to be very careful when I read, like, does this really mean this? Or like, is there a loophole here? So, as a layperson, I would consider myself a layperson. I don't have a legal background. So I get confused with this. The other thing is that, again, having 13 guidances, I mean, just take some out of publication and just like, stop referring to them, and, just make it more concise. I mean, easier to the reader, easier to the sponsor, easier to all sides, so that we can all understand the basics. And, it doesn't really need a rocket scientist to really know that we need to do this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, period. I mean, it's logical. This is what needs to be done for external validity and for, like, to be reflective for efficiency and safety of all drugs and devices across the globe, period. So, I mean, simplicité fait la beauté, we say in French. The more you ramble and the more you talk, you lose the meaning, and you lose, the significance and the beauty of it. So just like, make it easier, make it straightforward. I agree with Mark. No more details, okay? Just clarify, like, practicability, whatever that word is. I don't like it. Okay, I don't like, partial and full, whatever. So we talked about that. So yeah, make it simple, easy forward. That's what I wanted to say. And the things that I'd like to see moving forward, or the more significant changes down the road, is that get us involved, get more minority representative and grassroots organizations involved in this. Let them read it, let them interpret it, and I mean, like we're doing right now, but on a more official, probably, status in some ways. So yeah, again, we're happy to be serving on any FDA task force and in terms of this diversity guidance, and kudos again to FDA for taking this step and pushing this forward. Amazing. And I want to really thank the OMB, the FDA, for working through the Directive 15 in terms of recognizing MENA, the Middle Eastern and North African, because I'm Lebanese, I'm Middle Eastern originally. I love the fact that we have our own separate demographic category going forward, and thanks to all those, sponsors and big health, care organizations and databases for trying to include MENA in their clinical protocol. So one step at a time, we're making some progress, and we're there to help.
Perfect.
Awesome. And start now, don't wait till 2030, right now.
Oh my God, no way. I'm being very vocal and not vulgar, but very vocal about it, and very proactive. So yeah, we need to do something about it.
Yeah. So I've read this so many times over, and we even made the audio versions to kind of read through the little guidance. We have those all on YouTube as well. So I've listened to it over and over again. Some of the things that have stayed consistent for me are our alignment, or at least how I see our alignment as a company when it comes to some of these measures to meet enrollment goals. I think they did an excellent job with kind of highlighting some of these opportunities for that sustained community engagement. I like to call it unconditional community engagement, providing cultural competency and proficiency training. That's one of the other core, qualities that DiversiTrials brings as well, is working on that cultural competency training and ensuring that everybody that we partner with and that we work with has that skill set as well. Study participant awareness, knowledge of clinical study, providing language assistance for persons with limited English proficiency. Again, just diving into some of those other things that we've been working on as an organization, and how this aligns is working on these free education modules and micro learning lessons to provide to patients, so they have an understanding of what their rights are as a patient, a mock trial, what it would look like in your journey, providing tools or questionnaires for patients to be able to ask those questions to help inform their decision and inform their consent to participate in research, kind of combating, healthcare and research misinformation in that as well. Reducing participant burden, improving access to studies by limiting certain exclusion criteria, or broadening the inclusion criteria as well, and then employing decentralized methods when appropriate. So that has stayed consistent. I wrote a whole article for DiversiTrials on the 26th when the guidance came out initially. That was my key takeaway, and that stayed the same. Some of the things from the guidance that have changed for me is really kind of almost being able to, I think, identify the language issues. Obviously it's difficult to read. And I think part of, even when we talk about engaging outside stakeholders in the industry, we're industry professionals. We've been doing this for decades, right? And it's tough to get through. So how are we going to expect a lay person to get through this real heavy, almost legal language? You can't almost. So there are opportunities there as well, but that's definitely been something that I saw change was, how easy it was for me to kind of get through the guidance, because almost you would think almost a little bit of a flop on the other way. More times you read it, the more things start to make sense. But I think it almost hit a then downward curve for me. So yep, certain things started to make more sense, but then as I continued, then I was identifying. It's like you watch a movie 47 times, you start to notice those real small details and the Easter eggs they put in. And that's
the inconsistencies too.
And the inconsistencies, right. And then you'd pick up on they use the word must here. And I didn't really notice that before. And then how does that actually change the context of this section? And then I think most importantly for me in assisting sponsors or CROs, whoever's going to, have this task or have delegated this task to them, what I would like to see included in something that we're actually in the process of working on when we submit comments is almost this workflow, right? And if then, so if you're meeting this criteria, this is when a DAP is required based off the guidance. And I'm actually really excited to get through that as a team. And, hopefully we'll be able to maybe pull up what it is we were able to work next week, because it would be pretty interesting, I think, to see really how the FDA guidance is showing when a diversity action plan is required. I do love that they say you should do it all the time. You should do it for a program, engage early. And I think maybe part of the reason why they stress so heavily to engage the FDA early is because they understand that this is confusing and makes no sense to people. So talk with them and kind of work through some of these steps, and hopefully, you can get to somewhere where you actually have a good quality diversity action plan instead of just trying to follow a template per se. But that's all I had.
I'll go real quick because I want to give our guests as much time as possible to talk about what they want to talk about. I agree with a lot of the team here. Actually, you can see the opinion and the emotion change throughout the last month. If you look at the first video versus later on in the video, the enthusiasm for the potential change that this guidance might make went from, whoa, mic drop, yay, FDA, this is great. And kind of like how you do a house visit for a realtor, like you go buy a house and you go look at a house and you're like, oh, this is great, I want to go buy this house or a car or whatever it is. And then you buy it and you spend like a month in there and you're like, well, there's a crack in that wall. And what's over here? And you look at all of these little things that you didn't notice the first time. It's kind of how I felt. At first, I was so excited about what this could do for our industry. Then as I started to read through and look at the things that, oh, this is when you don't have to have a DAP. Oh, and by the way, here's the thing that is absolutely necessary. And you might partially need a DAP. And then, it's a may and must, whatever it is. I slowly but surely lost my enthusiasm for what this could impact for our industry. And so that changed for me. The passion was the same. The enthusiasm changed. And realistically, what I'd love to see change is a number of levels. I recognize fully what the scope of FDA is. FDA is responsible for providing guidance to protect the health and well-being of U.S. citizens. So they're not necessarily world police, although it might be really good to have them create in the guidance ways to interact with the world for other guidances. For example, that news about India and what they're going to do for guidances now as far as drug approvals, that's great. I'd love to see that, but we can't ask FDA to go out of their lane too much. We've already got a statutory requirement that is kind of pushing them out of their comfort zone. But going back to the comments, what I'd love to see change is I'd love to see more people engage in this. This isn't exactly this is meant to be public, and I don't really think as many people are speaking up as they should be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in general too, like this is ultimately the FDA trying to hold sponsors' feet to the fire. The people who are developing the drugs are the one that are responsible for ensuring that they are safe and effective, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want lawsuits. Like you don't want your drug to not work. You want it to be effective. You want it to help people. I think that's the core value and goal of why everybody's doing what they do. The India thing is totally separate. I've got a lot of thoughts and opinions on that. We've been talking about that pretty heavily as far as like expediting reviews from, approved, certain approved countries like here in the UK. But if I think it even kind of goes against really essentially what this diversity action plan guidance is, because the FDA itself is saying, hey, we have this expectation that the data that you collect is representative of the disease prevalence and the demographics here in the United States. So then you have another country that's like, oh, cool, what worked in the US? So we're just gonna adopt that and we're gonna approve the drug and streamline it. And I'm like, well, but the FDA also requires this. They're putting in regulations to require diversity action plans to make sure that the drugs are representative of the population. And then you're just gonna be like, no, we don't really care about our population. We're just going to go ahead and streamline approve it, even though we don't know that it's safe and effective, especially when you're looking at like race as Asian and you're hitting like South Asia with India. That would be Asian for race, but you definitely don't have the ethnicity data. No one's collecting that. So at best, you're getting like 3% that report race as Asian in clinical studies, and then your zero representation for ethnicity to be as granular even as India, which is weird to think of India as granular with the massive amount of population that they have. I digress.
So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I apologize. It's only 10 minutes, but I wanted to give Mark and Hannah as much of these 10 minutes as possible. I'm going to shut up. Mark, I'll share whatever screen you want. Let me know how I can support you.
Sure. Let me actually, can I just, if I just share that link of that one public comment in here, would you be able to pull that up?
Anonymous? Is that what we're looking for?
Yes, the anonymous from the 21st.
I sure
Here's the
do.
link one more time. If anyone wants to follow along, I guess we can put that in the public comment section here as well.
Yep, we got it pulled up on screen as well now too.
Oh, okay, wonderful. So here we have a public health scientist who's worked on dozens of diversity plans at a large pharma. That's great. And this person, similar to what the three of you have been doing right over the last couple of weeks, kind of went pointed out specific lines, but I think that's the kind of feedback that FDA probably encourages, right? Like, tell us exactly. So many, so many of these comments you read, like, oh, this is great, but maybe provide more detail. Okay, detail where, right? Like, what do you want? And here they make it very clear, like, okay, line 232, right? They talk about, considering enrollment goals, the discussion around enrollment goals on lines 300 to 311. They talk about, enrollment outside of the US, which I think is a very important point to bring up. So people that read this kind of have the same idea that their thoughts kind of follow a similar trajectory here, right? That what we've been doing here, and then the second to last paragraph here, lines 354 to 357. They go into different genetic variations that may or may not be prevalent in certain racial and ethnic populations. And then the last point is actually the big takeaway here is that this person suggests having an annual public workshop for sponsored CROs to share strategies for meeting DAP enrollment goals. So I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and it's you three and Hannah and I will take this back. Obviously, we're tasked with reading and interpreting these guidances for us, right? Then and Hannah leads monthly workshops, or by month twice a month, right? You meet with our internal diversity group. Is that right, Hannah? Right, and then obviously the various diversity initiatives are discussed, right, including this. And you're responsible for kind of disseminating this information out to everyone, and but then having something like this available I think is really, really helpful for sponsors and CROs and sites to get together to discuss that. I don't know, Hannah, if you would add to kind of how we're going about it, right? Feel free to add that on here.
Yeah, as a diversity lead, like Mark mentioned, I meet with our team at least once a month for the most part, and we just look for opportunities and ways that we can help weave ourselves in as a company to help accomplish this goal as the end goal for the entire industry and the entire community as a whole. We've worked on white papers, we've spoken at conferences, we've partnered with other organizations. I've done a lot of interviews with a lot of different organizations and research sites to see what they're doing, to try to combat this. It's really interesting for me to learn, and I love meeting with some of the smaller sites that I work with as well, to learn that they are taking the initiative outside of what the FDA recommends, outside of what their sponsors ask them to do. They are actually going and inserting them into the field, going to their community churches or police stations and holding free public health events to make and build those relationships with those people. That way they build that trust and build that relationship. They don't even address and ask them if they want to join a clinical trial first. They're human, right? They're just being a human. They're trying to build a good relationship with individuals, provide them with some healthcare, and then if that relationship builds, then they eventually get onto the topic of participating in clinical trials. And I think that says so much about those organizations and research sites that are so small, that don't have all the funds to be able to afford those, but they're taking the time out of their weekend. It's not their Monday to Friday work schedule. They're taking time out of their personal lives to go and make those connections and make changes in those individuals' lives. And personally, I have absolutely loved learning about that from a bunch of different organizations. I think that is one of the most commendable actions I've, really learned about over my last year and a half of being a diversity lead. I think it's amazing. And to the last point of this comment, when the user said the FDA plan an annual public workshop, I was actually thinking about this, 5 to 10 minutes ago. Like, imagine if there was, global would be massive, obviously, but at least within the US, if there was like, and I don't want to add more to the conference schedule that everybody has, but if there was like an FDA conference where they have a few FDA representatives and then representatives from whatever organization wants to go participate to talk about their guidance and get direct input, direct face-to-face conversations with those FDA representatives. I feel like that could go a really, really long way as well, to just have a face-to-face conversation about it.
Yeah, I think in the sense of like a workshop with the FDA being involved, it might be specifically beneficial, because everybody can get together at like ACRP or SCRS. Like they can put, those organizations that already hold these mega conferences can already put together kind of like little workshops, and they do often put together workshops where they focus on different things throughout the industry. So that would be great to see someone doing them. But I think what the FDA specifically and uniquely could offer to that is kind of like addressing those waiver requests, kind of maybe viewing some that they've received, whatever they can do publicly, going over, what it is that they are reporting based off of those statutory requirements, like what gets reported to Congress, and how those conversations go as well. All that would be pretty interesting as far as a workshop.
And just one last point to add to that, right, is this is new for the FDA as well, right? They created this document. Okay, how will this actually, in theory, right? They obviously, sat down and then drafted this document, and but it's all, how will this play out in the real world? They're learning this too, right? As so do we. So I think it would be, it's a two-way street in terms of from a learning standpoint how this actually works, and the things that the things that Hannah learns about from our side that are working with Creo, right? Those are the things that sponsors and the FDA need to know about, right? That can inform them to write better guidances and regulations in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like, and I want to point this out too, is where they talk about the enrollment goals beyond estimated prevalence and incidence history, because underrepresented groups may not be represented in incidence or prevalence estimates due to different healthcare access. So that's absolutely true. Now, globally speaking, we can get a lot of disease prevalence information, but specifically with the guidance, it's like disease prevalence information for the US population. So you're getting like more granular with your disease prevalence and how they're recommending these be put together. If you take disease prevalence as a whole, that's going to be much more significant than disease prevalence specifically in the US for those populations, because you're not collecting all the demographic data to begin with in the United States as a whole. So like Hadi would just be white, he's not going to be MENA for the past 20, 30 years. It's all it's been. And therefore you don't have the disease prevalence. So as far as then being inclusive and trying to make sure that we have representative data, all of Hadi's like med history here in the US is white. It's not listed as MENA. It's not Arabic in there. It's just white. So what do you do with that when we talk about estimating disease prevalence specifically in the United States? I think it's a little bit more responsible, and I understand like the FDA has that goal and the obligation for the US population, but I think as a sponsor, I always am going to continue to encourage you go above and beyond, right? You don't have to meet the bare minimum. So yes, you can and you should meet the disease prevalence and the goals here in the United States, but if you get a little bit of extra data to be more representative and be more inclusive, you have that better representation and better safety data. Because if we talk about representation and 0 to 0.1% of clinical trial data is for representative of the MENA population. What are you looking at for that? As far as disease prevalence, how in the U.S. specifically, if it could be like 3 people is all you need to enroll, right? Over like multiple hundreds, because the disease prevalence data specifically for the U.S. and how the racial and ethnic data has been collected is so low and so subpar that then you're not really going to have any quality safety data, right? Statistically speaking, if you have 2 subjects enroll in a study that meet one specific demographic, what data are you actually getting out that? Are you going to extrapolate anything that's significant that's going to tell you that, oh, yep, this is safe for this population of people because we tested it on 2 subjects? No, you're not. So to do better and do more, and you should kind of have these targets. I still think, statistically speaking, you should have baseline numbers of racial and ethnic targets to where we have acquired this much data across the board for this group of people. Therefore, we can determine across the board that this is safe. And then if you have that for multiple subsets, the data is really, really generalizable. So you can actually show that safety and efficacy and tolerability of those drugs. But I'm not a biostatistician.
No, thank you, Mitch, for bringing this up. But yeah, for the interest of time, yeah, we might probably want to have another discussion on that, or write a paper on that. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
All right. I think we're at the top of the hour, and I guess we're gonna end up wrapping this up. Importantly, thank you so much to Mark and Hannah from Creo for coming on to the summary DiversiTrials and Tribulations podcast today. What a journey. Tune in only a couple more times. I think we've got one more. We're going to have like Mitch said, we're going to have a process workflow coming together. We'll have a letter to the FDA ready to go. And I mean, if everything goes okay, I'd love to hit the submit button while we're live. That'd be so cool because you've all been with us throughout this journey. We may as well try to finish the journey together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, we'll see how next week goes. We're going to have Hannah and Mark back with us next week as well. And then we might end up needing to squeeze in some extra time coming to the beginning of September. But get your comments in to the FDA. Otherwise, if you're going to submit your own, get them in before the end of September. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye.